Gentlemen, I know we covered this last week, and I was kind of hoping that it would be another week or two before we'd have to come back, but alas, that's not what happened. Here's what we know. This past Tuesday, the House of Representatives passed a bill that rolled back 2016 FCC privacy rules. Now, of course, the week before, the Senate did the exact same thing, and this was entirely across party lines. So you had the Democrats against it, you had the Republicans for it. The rules that they rolled back included several components that spelled out exactly what users could expect from ISPs in terms of their privacy. For example, opt-in permissions to share web browsing history, geolocation, and financial data with third parties. The rules also stopped ISPs from sharing information about age, gender, and ethnicity. Now, the bill is now headed to Donald Trump's desk, and he has already pledged signing it, of course, under the banner of consumer choice, saying that it was about time that we level the playing field on the internet because companies like Google and Facebook and Microsoft don't operate under the same privacy rules that ISPs like Verizon, Sprint, and Comcast do. The most vocal critic of the rules when they came out last October was then Commissioner, now Chairman, Ajit Pai. He was the one who first started calling this corporate favoritism, saying that we are giving more power to companies like Google and social media sites than we are to the telcos who actually connect us. His argument then is now the one that was being used by senators and representatives now to justify this. Now, gentlemen, I think we made our feelings pretty clear last week when we said that this was a huge corporate sellout, that there is very, very little way for you to actually say that this is for consumer choice. But now it looks like this is going to be law. This is going to happen. Donald Trump will sign this. What does this mean for the telcos? So let's step back and assume that there's no rubbing of hands, there's no twirling of mustaches. What can Verizon and Sprint and Comcast and AT&T now do with that data that they could not do before? Curtis, let's start with you.
Well, I think the big thing that's important to note is that the rules that were scrapped never went into force. So at a practical level, the question of what they can do now that they couldn't do before is nothing, because the rules never stopped them from doing anything. Having looked at this a little bit more closely and heard some of my journalistic brethren who live up in the DC area take a look at it, I think that one of the things this does for the telcos is remove one source of uncertainty, because prior to this, you had the FCC that had stepped in and said that they were going to regulate individual consumer privacy. And you also had the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, which had been in many ways explicitly authorized to do just that. And so I think that a lot of these ISPs were concerned that at some point they would get some dueling regulations out of the FTC and FCC, and then you would have to go through all sorts of court stuff to figure it out. So while the practical effect on consumers today is nothing at all, in the future, there is at least the hope that the FTC will step in and do some regulation. Barring that, there is a ton of aggregation and targeting of ads and services that will make the kind of ads we've become used to from our Google searches and Facebook activities seem like broad scatter shots in the dark in comparison.
Right. And of course, we did bring up the FTC last week. And yes, on the surface, it does sound like the FTC is a better place to handle this. Unfortunately, because of the charter of the FTC can't bring up broad-ranging rules like the FCC can. So if you have a complaint, you as an individual user, you have to bring a complaint to the FTC. You can't say on behalf of the 2 million people who are going to be affected in the state by this policy, you have to do something. That's an incredible logjam. I mean, if you're talking about efficiency of government, you've just gone for the route that is 1,000 times more inefficient. And I think that's kind of what the people who looked at that part of the decision said, no, that's bogus. That's just justification that doesn't actually exist. Lou, let me throw it over to you, because there's a fun side to this. I mean, yes, we are losing privacy that we could have had in the future, but at the same time, we've got certain entities on the internet, some trustworthy, some not, saying, okay, well, if this passes, Doesn't this mean that we can band together and buy the browsing history of Congress? That's not actually how this is going to work, right? I mean, I can't say, hey, Verizon, I want just the browsing information for Lou MARESCA.
I mean, I think most of these companies are saying, hey, we're going to, de-identify, remove the information, that can basically target particular people. And I think, that doesn't prevent them from not doing that, though. I think at this point, I mean, most companies, like for instance, Comcast took their opportunity to kind of come out of the woodwork and say, you know what, we're going to be good. We're not going to actually sell this personal information, your browser history. Well, what they didn't say is we might sell your, what they didn't say is maybe they'll sell your location information or some other things, but they won't sell your browser history. And the same thing with Verizon. I mean, they have several programs that come along that are at, like Curtis pointed out, there are advertising based, and they need demographic information and other things. That's, to me, almost identifiable information about your person, and it could come from things like browser history and other things. And then you have AT&T. Of course, they have rules against selling privacy information, private data about customers. But again, I think that all of them don't say, hey, we're not going to use particular or sell particular types of data. I think TWiET talked about it last week. Location information is one of those things, right? I mean, they might not be identifiable, but if they can say this particular demographic is in this part of the state or this part of your city, and we should target ads for this particular type of thing, I mean, it becomes almost an invasion. And I think there's going to be some fine lines. I think there's going to need to be more regulation around this, or it's going to be a slippery slope, and they're just going to hide behind particular things that they're not doing, and when they are doing other things.
Right, and some privacy groups have said, look, we don't think ISPs are going to wholesale use this in the worst possible interpretation. They're gonna try to anonymize the data, because what they want to do is they want to sell data sets. They don't want to sell data on particular individuals. No retailer wants to know how X person is buying. They want to know how demographic X is buying. So give us the data set for those between 30 and 35 who make between this and this much, who are male, who live in the northwest of the country. That's a typical data set that is usable for commerce. However, and Curtis, I got to go back to you on this, because there is another part to this, and it does sound like tinfoil hat wearing stuff, but it absolutely makes sense. There is a really big customer who would love this decision, and that's law enforcement. Because if you do this, and if you do make it possible for me to buy any data from ISPs, then law enforcement suddenly has the ability to search data without a warrant.
Oh, absolutely, because they can just go in and buy the data without, as you say, having to have a warrant. So I think that there are probably a whole bunch of Fourth Amendment cases that are going to be coming out with this. It's going to be very interesting to see just which pieces of data the carriers decide are economically worth selling, because not every piece is. And as you point out, not only is it unlikely that they're going to drill down and sell my personal information as a one-off, it's not really economically advantageous for them to do that, because they would have to realistically charge somewhere in the 4 or 5 figures to make it worth them while for them to go through the system and pull it out. And this is all about economics. Let's remember that this is something that's a boon to the ISPs and their real customers, and those real customers are the other businesses out there. So I think what we're going to see is a lot of metadata aggregation, a lot of law enforcement and other sort of unintended consequences coming into the scenario. And even though this is not what anyone on the congressional side wanted, a lot of uncertainty for at least the next 18 to 24 months as different companies try to sort this out, and realistically, at least a handful of lawsuits work their way through the courts.
We've got Emily the Strange in our chat room, who is a longtime member of the TWiET Riot. She makes a great point. She says, okay, she's not all that concerned about what they might sell to a retailer. She's not even concerned what they might be collecting against her for law enforcement. She's worried that data gets sold to an entity that doesn't protect it. And you don't have to go very far. It was just a couple of weeks ago that the Secret Service lost a laptop that was left on a car seat that contained confidential information about Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and Pope Francis. So, I mean, that's the thing. Even if you trust the organizations to buy it with good intent, once you let it out, you can't trust that those organizations are going to store it properly.